Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our NCTA webinar on this fine Friday. Appreciate everybody being here. We still got some folks coming into the waiting room, so if you'll indulge me, let me do a little bit of shameless self-promotion here while we're letting some folks get back in. Just wanted to remind everybody that this is the latest in our series of National Coal Transportation Association webinars. We've got a couple more that we'll be doing for you here this fall before we get into the holidays. If you saw in your OnTrack newsletter yesterday, we've scheduled a presentation for November 16th, where we'll be able to go over the results of the midterm elections. And that's also 2 days right before the potential for another rail strike. So we'll put a webinar on the schedule for November 16th to talk about election results and where the rail strike sits at that point. I'll be presenting at that one. We will also be scheduling a webinar before the holidays here from our O&M committee with a special guest speaker on couplers and draft gears. So keep an eye out, watch for those registration announcements to hit your inbox. But we appreciate everybody getting on here this morning for this one. Also, one last NCTA reminder, remind everyone that we've set the dates for our conferences next year. The O&M conference and the spring conference will be back to back, May 8th to 11th in Scottsdale. And then we'll be back in Colorado at Cheyenne Mountain Resort in September 18th to 20th. So all of those dates are also listed at the bottom of your OnTrack newsletter yesterday. So we encourage you to mark your calendars and get those on your agenda. With that, we want to move right into our featured guest speaker today. Dr. John Deskins is the director of the Business and Economic Research and an associate professor of economics at West Virginia University. And Dr. Deskins recently authored a new report on the continuing economic impact of coal. He'll be presenting on that today. He's graciously offered to make copies of his slides available after the presentation if you'd like them, or we'll provide you a link to the report that Dr. Deskins is talking about, which has all of the information that he's presenting today, plus a lot of other good stuff in the report. So we'll provide both of those documents to you after the presentation. Dr. Deskins is well known in the coal world. He's testified before Congress numerous times. He's frequently quoted in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and a whole bunch of other highbrow publications like that. He's author, also published in a number of prestigious journals, and has been involved in more than $2 million worth of funded economic research. So we're very grateful to Dr. Deskins for making time in his busy schedule to be with us today. And at this point, Dr. Deskins, I'll invite you to share your screen and we can get started.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Ward. Let me just say to everyone, I'm happy to be here and I'm happy to talk about this report that we did back over the summer. Somebody just give me, Mr. Ward, I can see you, so give me a nod. Okay, good. Just to make sure I don't want to talk for the whole time without the screen share working. So just a tad bit more background on me. You know, as Mr. Ward said, I lead the Bureau of Business and Economic Research at WVU. We're an applied economics research shop to serve, you know, the business community, government, and community leaders in West Virginia. And we don't work in energy specifically. I mean, we're not energy economists. We do a wide range of applied economics research, but because we're in West Virginia and because energy, you know, coal and gas is so important to West Virginia, that means that kind of de facto, we do a lot of energy oriented research as well. So over the years, I've done several projects, and for decades, my shop, even before I took over 10 years ago, my shop has done work on energy economics in our state. But last winter or last spring, the West Virginia Coal Association just approached us about branching out a little bit and doing an economic impact study for coal for the entire nation. So we don't usually work outside of West Virginia. just because of our scope and our mission. But but we were happy to take this on to help people better understand the economic impact of coal in the entire country. I mean, it's the same methods. There's nothing that's different if we go from West Virginia to other states. It's just with their mission, we usually keep it to West Virginia. Anyway, let me move on, talk about the economic impact in the entire nation that coal generates. I'll talk a little bit just briefly about recent trends in coal. This audience, I'm sure, is familiar with these data, but in the report itself, we have a lot of contextual and background information that you all may not need, but it's in the report so that just the general reader can understand what's been going on with coal, even aside from specialists like yourself. And I just will say really quickly that the report really focuses on the top 10 coal producing states for 2021. So we do a national coal impact. Within the report, we kind of go state by state for these top 10 coal producing states. So, I don't know exactly what states are represented here in the audience, but if you need stuff that's specific to your state, if you're in one of these 10 states, you can find national numbers, but you can also find state specific numbers for your states if you're from one of these 10 states. Again, context, you all are familiar with this, but it's in the report just to help the general reader understand. But here we just kind of start by showing what's happened to overall coal production in the nation over the past couple decades. And this is important to understand, really, I mean, even for this audience, because kind of the whole premise of this study, I think, comes from, kind of a misconception, because some people see that coal production has fallen significantly over the past 20 years, and they think, I think mistakenly, they think that coal isn't important to our economy anymore because we've experienced this drop over the past couple decades. But just because we've experienced a drop doesn't necessarily mean that coal's not still important. I mean, as you see, we're still producing over 500 million tons of coal in the country, spread across a bunch of different states. And so I think the report shows that coal still has an important economic impact despite the drop. Maybe it's not as big of an impact as it was 10 years ago, but it's still an important impact. So this is really important to the premise of this study. In a similar vein, we do show what's happened to coal mining jobs over the past couple decades. Just for context here, you see what's happened to total number of coal mining jobs in the country. This is showing an index. So as you see, we're down to about 50 now off of a base year of 2001. So we've lost about half the coal mining jobs over those past 2 decades. But there's still quite a few coal mining jobs around. Certainly in West Virginia, they generate an important impact. And just for comparison purposes, you can see what's happened to the number of jobs nationwide in all other industries outside of coal, just for comparison purposes. But this slide really illustrates one reason why coal still has an important impact, despite the reduction in the number of jobs. Coal mining jobs are really high-paying jobs. This just shows the average wage for coal miners nationally compared to the average wage for workers in all the other industries in our economy. You can see a pretty sharp contrast there, to say the least. So, one coal mining job, just, be very frank, it generates a much larger economic impact compared to one job in the average industry outside of coal, because that pay is so high. That's really important for West Virginia too, because in West Virginia, in so many parts of our state, we have, lower than average wages just because of the nature of the state and the background of the state. So those high wage jobs are really an important part of the picture, and it's important for that reader to understand that. I mean, it's very hard to, find a job that requires just a high school diploma that pays $90,000 a year. Those are very, very few and far between. $90,000 job with just a high school diploma. One point that I've been illustrating in West Virginia quite a bit over my speeches over the past couple of years relates to exports. I'm sorry. The way my screen looks today, I can't actually see the top of my slide. So if I say anything that's wrong, it's because the top of my slides are cut off, but I think I have them memorized well enough so that doesn't matter. But anyway, this shows exports. One thing that I show to the audiences in West Virginia is, coal that we've produced that goes to electric power generation, that has fallen significantly, and that's where pretty much all of the decline has occurred. We still produce a lot of metallurgical coal in West Virginia, and we still export a lot of coal overseas. And there may not be a lot of upside potential with regards to coal for electric power generation. There certainly is upside potential for exports. As you see, for 2021, exports have gone up compared to 2020. And even though we don't have 2022 data yet, we all know that exports for this year have gone up as well. So we're seeing a little bit of a surge in West Virginia right now based on those export numbers. But this is so important. Exporting is really important for an economic system in many ways. I could kind of ramble about that for some time, but I'll spare you. But it's really important that this is one of our key export commodities in West Virginia and in other states, to bring in money from outside of the state to let that money circulate over and over again within the state. But I will say, as a caveat too, though, even though there's upside potential with exports, global coal demand is very volatile, so there's more risk associated with relying more on exports as well. As we all know, so many things can affect global coal demand, things from a flood in Australia to a tsunami in Japan to a war in Europe. All those things can affect export demand. So it's hard to say what's going to happen to exports from one year to the next. So it is a more volatile kind of economic enterprise. Again, this is just data from the Energy Information Administration. We don't produce this national forecast ourselves. We only forecast for West Virginia. But there you see, really for the reader of the report, that that's what the long-term forecast looks like from the EIA for coal, for electric power generation, for exports, and for industrial uses like met coal. Again, you see what the EIA forecast is for exports, but again, it could be higher than that. We don't know. So that's the end of the context. Let me get on to the meat and potatoes of the study. And I will say what we're relying on here is an economic multiplier model. So if we sell $100 worth of coal, if we pay our workers, I'm just throwing out numbers just to make the point. If we pay our workers $50 as a result of that $100 of coal that we sell, then that spending is directly part of the economy. Okay, clearly the coal sales and those direct wages are themselves part of economic activity. But the real key to this study is the multiplier effect. The issue is that coal mine is taking the $100 that it receives in income, and it's spending that money in the economy. It's recirculating that money through the economy, at least a large portion of that money. It's buying inputs, it's buying energy inputs itself, it's buying raw materials, it's buying machinery and equipment. And those workers, coal mine worker receives $50. He's taking that money and spending it on housing. He's spending it at the restaurant, at the grocery store, at the movie theater, at whatever entertainment venue. And that second round of spending creates more and more economic activity in each region and in the nation as a whole. So a starting point for this study is just simply to look at the raw numbers around coal sales, around the compensation of coal mine workers, and around the direct tax revenues that coal generates in the economy. But the real heart of what we did is to take those direct numbers and apply an economic multiplier model to understand how that spending, when it's respent and respent and when it recirculates to the economy, we want to understand how that broader multiplier effect generates even more output in the economy, even more employee compensation, and even more tax revenue in the economy. I will say we mostly do these economic impact studies with a multiplier model that's calibrated specifically to West Virginia. But of course, for this study, we've expanded and we've used an economic multiplier that's calibrated to each of those 10 states specifically. So all the numbers that we are, or all the models that we are using to generate these numbers are calibrated specifically to those top 10 coal producing states and to the nation as a whole to really account for the different dynamics in the economic systems across all of our states. But here's what we show for the overall economic impact for coal in the US. Now that first column labeled direct That's not our data. The first column is just simply data from the Energy Information Administration, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, or whatever other source that we rely on to get those raw numbers. So still today, even with the decline, we're still producing over 20 billion in economic output as a result of coal mining in the U.S. That coal mining is supporting over 37,000 coal miners across the country, and it's generating more than 3 billion in labor income in the country. Even just that is important to communicate to our audiences, because again, there's this misconception that, well, coal production's fallen, so it's not important anymore. But the facts are very clear. Generates more than 20 billion in economic activity, 37,000 workers, and over 3 billion in employee compensation. That in and of itself is important to understand. But then the second column, that's what we did really as part of the study. We're looking at the indirect and induced impacts that come as those coal mines and as those coal mine workers spend that money in the economy, creating more economic activity and more employment down the cycle, you might imagine. Now, let me just remind you, just in case anybody's accidentally left their microphone on, please mute yourself so that we don't get any random background noise if anybody's pecking on their keyboard or something like that. It happens all the time in Zoom meetings, of course, we're all used to that. So as you see, just to kind of run through the second column, we estimate that 20 billion in economic activity at the coal mines directly, as it recirculates through the economy, it generates more than 23 billion in additional economic activity through the multiplier effect. Those jobs that are directly at the coal mines and all that activity at the coal mines creates 99,000 additional jobs as that money is spent and respent in the economy. And it creates over 7 billion in additional income for workers. I will say those multipliers, if you just look at the ratio between, if you just take the numbers in the second column and divide them by the first column, if you look at those multiplier ratios, they're relatively high. Coal mining has a relatively high multiplier, and that's because of the nature of the industry in various ways, but it's also definitely because of the high wages that the workers receive. Anyway, the third column is just simply the total of the first two columns. We are estimating that coal mining in this nation for 2021 creates 43 or 44 billion in total economic activity in the country. It supports over 136,000 jobs nationwide. It supports over 10 billion, almost 11 billion in labor income, and it supports over 2 billion in total state and local tax revenue. That's not including federal tax revenue, by the way. This study was really done on a state-by-state basis, so that's 2.3 billion in state and local tax revenue. Again, I'm not in the coal industry. I am a general economist for the state of West Virginia. I'm just simply looking at the numbers that come directly from government sources. I'm applying very standard economic multipliers to those numbers, and that's what the numbers say. I'm not an advocate for coal. I don't work for coal. This is just objectively the facts. 44 billion in economic activity, 136 billion plus, 136,000 plus jobs, 11 billion in labor income in the country. And I'll just give you kind of a little flavor of what we have here. You can go through the full report and see this for all 10 states if you live in one of those particular states. But if we just look at Wyoming, of course, the highest coal producer by volume, in Wyoming, coal mining in that state generates over 5 billion in economic activity, over 12,000 jobs in the state, over 781 million in employee compensation in Wyoming, when you consider those direct jobs in that state, plus the multiplier effect that the state enjoys as that money moves through the economy. Almost 250 million in tax revenue comes from coal altogether when you consider those severance tax revenues, plus just the sales tax, the income tax that follows from those jobs and that spending moving through the economy. Moving on to my state, since we're the second highest coal producer by volume, I mean, and I'll just tell you, I mean, some of you who are from big states, I don't know if we have anybody here from Texas or California, or a big state, these numbers may not seem significant to you, but West Virginia is a small state. We're talking about less than 1.8 million people. We're talking about a total GDP of 75 or 80 billion in the state. We're talking about a state with total number of jobs of 700,000. These numbers are big for West Virginia. That's pretty clear. But in my state, 7-8 billion in economic activity altogether, supported by coal mining, over 21,000 jobs supported by West Virginia coal miners directly, plus those jobs that come through the multiplier process, over 1.6 billion in total income to workers in the state as a result of coal, and 600 million in tax revenue in our state. Still important numbers for West Virginia, despite the changes that we've seen in recent years. I don't want to belabor this. I mean, you all are kind of getting the point here, and you can look at the report to get the full numbers. But Pennsylvania, just in case we have any of my neighbors in Pennsylvania here, over 4 billion in economic activity in Pennsylvania, 12, almost 13,000 jobs in the state, over $1 billion in labor income in Pennsylvania as a result of coal. And I think Kentucky is my last specific state to illustrate. There you see the numbers for my other neighbor, Kentucky, as well. Over 8,000 jobs in Kentucky that result from coal mining in 2021. I kind of stole my thunder there. Let's just imagine that's the end of the study. Somebody's going to shout up and they're going to say, hey, that's the economic impact of coal mining. But we have to remember that we have a lot of electricity in the country that's generated by burning coal. And if we really want to understand the economic impact of coal in the country, we can't just look at coal mining. We have to look at coal-fired power generation as well. And so that's what we're also careful to do in the study. I think some studies like this before have probably just stopped with coal production, but it really makes sense to look at all those jobs and all that spending associated with coal-fired power generation as well. So that's the second half of the study. I mean, as you can imagine, this is a long study by page count because we're looking at coal production for those 10 states, and we're looking at coal-fired power generation for 10 states as well. So it's got a lot of stuff in there. A little bit of background. Here you can see the fuels that we're using to generate electricity in the country. You can see the decline associated with coal. But again, same story. Even though it's declined, the numbers are still impressive in many ways if you just think about it objectively. Here's our overall economic impact numbers associated with coal-fired power generation. Same process before. Coal-fired power generation in the country in 2021 generated over 200 billion in economic output in the country, over 245,000 jobs, over 33 billion in labor income, and almost 6 billion in state and local tax revenue across our states. I said the multiplier with coal was very high compared to most other industries. And interestingly enough, the multiplier with coal-fired power generation is even higher due to the nature and capital intensity at those coal-fired power plants. And due to the really high jobs associated with coal-fired power plants, we're getting even higher multipliers. These are actually some of the highest multipliers across all industries in the country. So very high multipliers, indicating this means a lot to our economy, especially when you think of just, some people might say, oh, 38,000 jobs directly at coal-fired power plants. But given that those are very high wage jobs, translates into over 245,000 jobs altogether. For West Virginia, just see what those numbers mean for my state. Over almost 6 billion in economic activity, over 8,000 jobs, so on and so forth. I also show the data for Pennsylvania just for illustrative purposes. Again, as soon as we're out of here, I encourage you to go get the full report and look up your state in particular. And even though the report's kind of long by page count, the structure is pretty simple. So that's kind of it. I mean, we just estimate the numbers, in the way that I described, and there's the total economic impact for the country if you just simply combine the numbers from coal mining with the numbers from coal-fired power generation. There you see 381, almost 382,000 jobs in 2022. I'm sorry, 2021 that come as a result of coal in our country. Again, just objectively, you come up and ask me, does coal still matter to the U.S.? I say, well, if you ask me, 382,000 jobs certainly matters. That's an important impact. That means a lot to our nation. So that's it. I'm pretty brief. Take the full report, use it to communicate to your audiences or your constituents in your state. I'm happy to take questions, and again, thank you for allowing me to come and share this research with you.
Great. Appreciate that, Dr. Deskins, and we'll distribute to everybody after the meeting here. We'll distribute to everybody a link to the report so that you can all get that good data. If you've got any questions, please feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself or type a question in the chat box, whatever's the most Zoom comfortable thing for you to do. I've got a couple of questions, Dr. Deskins. What was the genesis of this study, and are there any plans to do updates or future looks at this going down the road?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, the work that we do in West Virginia is, the work that we do at my shop is mostly, commissioned. I mean, if a group comes to us and ask us to, calculate some data or to present some analysis, we usually do it based on demand. So, the numbers change from year to year, and if somebody sees fit to ask us to update the study, a couple of years down the road as the numbers continue to change, then we'll certainly be happy to do that. That's no problem at all. But the one other thing that we have in the queue, which is almost done, it's been delayed a little bit due to workforce shortages that we are experiencing. Economists talk about workforce shortages all the time nowadays, but even economics research shops are experiencing workforce shortages. But anyway, to get to the point, we are actually looking at a study on, or we're getting ready to produce a study on the economic impact of met coal. This study looked at all coal altogether, but we're going to look at met coal specifically, and we're going to also consider that steel production that's associated with met coal. We're going to do a study on that to help people understand that part of the overall picture. I think there's some misconceptions out there that all coal goes to electric power generation. Coal is going away, but we need to be clear that, hey, we have a whole other industry. We have metallurgical coal. It generates important impacts in many ways as well. And it's not going away. That has nothing to do with the discussion around electric power generation. It's a totally separate issue, and we need to understand that, and we need to understand the stability associated with met coal in the context of the declines in overall coal production that we've seen.
Right. Is that met coal study going to look at the whole nation too, not just West Virginia?
It's focusing on West Virginia specifically. If somebody wants to approach me about expanding that to the whole nation, then I'll be glad to take that up as well.
Note to all you met coal producers outside of West Virginia who might be on the call today. If you want in on this, speak up.
I kind of came here just to volunteer because I like to talk about economics and I like to share our research. But if I can get in kind of a little sales pitch for our services, then that works too.
Yeah, no, you saw how I started this webinar. We're not above a little shameless self-promotion, so we're more than happy to log roll you on that one. You mentioned a couple of times the multiplier effect that gets applied here, and how coal has a higher multiplier effect because of the high wages and so forth. Do you have any idea off the top of your head how much higher the coal industry multiplier is effect than, say, if we compared that to the multiplier effect for natural gas or for renewables?
Well, natural gas is also very capital intensive, and natural gas also has high wages. Those are there are a few different drivers of that multiplier, but those are two of the main drivers: capital intensity and average wages. And natural gas is also pretty high because it's also very capital intensive, and those wages are very high. Now natural gas doesn't have as many jobs as coal because, once you drill a gas well, there's not very many jobs that are required to maintain that well. So there aren't as many jobs on the front end, but it also has high multipliers. It's just your starting point is lower with gas, but it also has a high multiplier. As far as renewables go, I'm not completely for sure. Honestly, nobody's asked me to study renewables. Again, I do research mostly by request in West Virginia, and in West Virginia we have very little solar, and we have only a modest amount of wind power generation. So I haven't been asked to do that study, but I'd have to just look into that. But if you look at other industries, especially something like leisure and hospitality, where we're talking about restaurants and bars, the multipliers that we're talking about here are vastly higher than an industry like leisure and hospitality. That's not your question, but I'm just throwing that out there.
No, but I think it's helpful for people to think about that. And, so many states, particularly when we're talking at the energy transition, a lot of states are, the old saw, we'll teach coal miners how to code, would stay-at-home jobs coding or moving into the service industry, I'm assuming that those also have lower multipliers than what you see in an industry like coal.
It's probably safe to assume that, because almost every industry has a lower multiplier. I mean, again, almost no industry has wages as high as coal, especially for the requirement of only a high school diploma. So almost every industry has lower multipliers. So it's probably safe to assume. And I just will say that people who say, we're going to go to southwestern West Virginia and take a 55-year-old retired, laid off, or not retired, but a 55-year-old laid off coal miner, and we're going to teach that person how to code. I'll just be honest, that person is in an ivory tower in New York or somewhere that has no connection to the picture that we see in these depressed parts of West Virginia.
Right. Understood. We're on the same team there. We've got a couple of people on the call here that actually sell used coal, Dr. Deskins. The coal ash that's left over gets marketed for a lot of different construction applications and so forth. I'm assuming, but could you clarify, did your study go into any of the economic impacts of those uses?
No, all economic impact studies are incomplete. Anytime you talk about an industry or some enterprise in the country, there's so much that you can quantify, but there's always going to be a little bit more that's on top of or in addition to what you can quantify. And normally economic impact studies are structured such that the conclusion is, we've studied the economic impacts of these parts, but there's always a little bit more out there that we weren't able to quantify. We actually put together, this is going off on a tangent, but my office put together a proposal recently on using coal ash in construction materials and what that might mean to West Virginia, but it wasn't ultimately funded by the government, so we didn't get that project. So we haven't done that kind of study, but it'd be interesting. It'd be interesting to see what additional impacts come from coal ash and other byproducts.
Absolutely. Again, for those of you in the audience, if anybody has questions, please feel free to raise your little hand thingy or unmute yourself or shoot a message in the text box, the chat box. I have one other question. A lot of the people on this call, Dr. Deskins, have been affected over the last 2 years by constraints imposed by the rail service issues that we're having in the country right now, and a lot of the coal is there and the demand for the coal is there, but people haven't been able to get it delivered. So the numbers we're looking at in 2021, and even more so the numbers that we'll see coming out in 2022, if we refresh this study, are going to be of what did get sold and used. But from an economist point of view, is there a way to calculate how much higher those numbers could have been if in fact people had been able to get the coal that they needed?
I'm sure there is. I personally don't really know how to get the data right offhand on kind of coal that's idle because of infrastructure constraints. I don't know. My fear is that it's not easy to get that data on a kind of widespread basis. But if we could get the data, then it's certainly possible to calculate those additional economic impacts. But as with many projects in economics, it's kind of difficult to get data on the front end in many cases.
If we were to get let's say a representative sample of coal-fueled utilities who could quantify how much was in their forecast that they didn't get, would there be a way to extrapolate that into a larger number?
I think so. I mean, I think there would be. I mean, I don't want to make promises right off the top of my head when I've only thought about it for 30 seconds, but it seems like that's logical. If the utilities could provide that to us, then I don't think it would be hard to just extend that out to additional impacts that would have occurred absent the constraints.
Right, exactly. That's great. Are you working on anything else that has to do with coal industry or that these folks would be interested in?
I'm working on so many projects. I have a hard time keeping up with all of them. I mean, my team is at least, but I don't think we have any additional coal projects right now, other than the met coal study. But I'm sure that one more will come down the pike soon. I look forward to when it gets here.
That's great. Well, we appreciate you. I know you had a very busy schedule. We had to put this conversation on a Friday because you've been running hither and yon. I've got one more question just came in through the chat box here. At a high level, how does one extrapolate coal production to power generation in another state?
Wait a minute. I'm not for sure.
So I think the question is, we produce coal in Wyoming, but that coal gets consumed in Florida. How did you, so the two halves of your study, one being state by state coal mining jobs, the second half being, the impact of the coal use for power generation. Did you tie those two things together, or were those different data sets that went into that calculation?
Well, we just looked at the spending that comes from the spending and the employment that comes from the mines and from the coal-fired power generation. So if coal is produced in West Virginia and, the money comes to West Virginia coming from a Florida utility, then that's counted as part of the West Virginia impact because the money's coming to West Virginia.
Okay.
Does that make sense? I mean, the impacts are where the coal is originated, because that's where the sales are coming to,
right,
to recirculate in that kind of state of origin, if I understand the question correctly.
Yeah. Now, the second half of your study looked at the impact on the power generation side. Did you pull in? So is that taking into account information on power plant jobs and how those jobs are higher compensated too?
Right. Absolutely. I mean, that's kind of that's starting over from a different angle of things, and that's using different data to look at power plant spending and power plant jobs in each state. So we're kind of starting over again for the second half of the study. I will say that for the second half of the study, when we talk about how much power plants spend, we actually exclude how much they spend on coal.
On fuel, okay.
On other inputs and on labor, because we don't want to double count the spending associated with coal.
Okay.
So we're careful to not double count the coal itself.
Okay, great. Our person who asked the question says, okay, thanks, perfect, makes sense. So we're capturing the coal side of the economic question in the state where the coal was produced. We're capturing the utility power production part in the state where the power is produced, but we're backing out those fuel costs because they've already been captured in the production state.
Right. Now, I will say that some economic impact studies, especially, I don't know if I should say this, but I'm not going to name names. I'm not going to point to any particular entity, but there are some economic research organizations that are private that will not be so careful to avoid double counting. And they'll therefore produce bigger numbers. But we absolutely are careful to not double count, to make sure that our numbers are accurate and they're not overstating impacts by counting the same thing in two different places.
Right. Absolutely. So that's great. Any other questions from the group? Now's your chance, because we're about to wrap it up here and give everybody back the rest of their hour. By the way, I read an article where somebody was criticizing us about giving you back time, but I'll still take it. But anyway, Dr. Deskins, we really appreciate you taking the time to share this with our group. I know you've got a super busy schedule, and it's great. It's great information for us all to take back to our own places. Those of you who work in bigger organizations, I encourage you to share this link with folks in your public affairs and government affairs departments, so that they can also take advantage of this good information that's come out of this study. So with that, Dr. Deskins, thank you so much. Appreciate your help, and we'll say goodbye to everybody. Hope you all have a safe and good weekend.
Great. Thank you all so much. Happy to join you today.
Thank you much.